Hi, welcome to the show, Victor. I'm so glad you're here. I'm excited to talk to you about Ayurveda. And so what I like to ask my guests most of the time is, how did you get into doing what you're doing? We all have a story, and that usually guides us into our path of what we are currently doing. So what's that for you?
So my story, I'll give you the short version because I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to spend the whole time talking about my story. Um, the I had an ailment as a very young man. I was 18 years old. I had this back pain, and it wasn't anything severe, but it wasn't anything I want to live with either. So I grew up in Los Angeles, very kind of normal upbringing, whatever that means, but normal in the sense that I had just basically normal beliefs about health, which is you go to the doctor when you're sick. That's it.
Mhm. Right.
And so I got this ailment and I said, okay, well, I'll go to the doctor and maybe they'll be able to tell me what to do. So that was kind of when I had my education about how that world worked. I started going to doctors, got passed off to other doctors, and got all these tests. And long and short of it is, I sat down one day with, I think, like the sixth or seventh doctor I'd seen in a year and a half. And he said, look, I'm just going to be honest with you. We don't really know what this is. It's not an emergency type situation. It's chronic. And I can either give you painkillers or I can suggest surgery. And so I basically said, no way. I'm not doing either of those things as a
Mm-hmm.
19-year-old guy. And I started looking for other options. That's when I discovered yoga. And I went to a few yoga classes, realized that, okay, my body's a lot more tense than I thought it was, and scheduled a private session with that yoga teacher. And she looked me up and down. She kind of gave me assessed my body and said, okay, try these three postures. And within 2 weeks, the pain was gone.
Wow.
So that really opened me up to this idea that there is a whole other world of healing out there besides just what is the standard or
Mm-hmm.
the conventional in the United States. Continuing to fast forward through the story, I met my current yoga teacher, and Ayurveda is the sister science of yoga. At the time, I was looking for a new career, and he introduced me to Ayurveda. I checked it out, and I was like, this is fantastic. I love this. And I never looked back.
Awesome. So you became an Ayurvedic doctor. And why don't you describe to us or define for us what is this practice that's been around for thousands of years, do we say? I mean, how long has it
Thousands.
been around? Thousands?
Yeah, yeah. Ayurveda is the written down part's about 5,000 years old, but it was
Mm-hmm.
done in oral tradition for a lot longer before that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was how medicine was done in the eastern part of the world, in what's now India.
Mm-hmm.
Plant-based, right? All the healing herbs, and very functional and very practical, and very sophisticated. So it's the idea that it's holistic. So this idea that we are a being, a whole being,
Mm-hmm.
and that you can't say that there's a problem here and then ignore everything else.
Right.
Everything's integrated and everything's functioning together as a very complex world in and of itself. So Ayurveda is holistic in the sense that it says, okay, we need the whole body to be in balance to basically avoid getting diseases.
Mm-hmm.
And that balance is not some just general sense of balance, like, oh, everyone should eat 2,200 calories a day. Everyone should have X amount of protein. Everyone should be on keto. Everyone should be on Atkins. Everyone should be on fill in the blank with the fad diet.
Right.
It's that your body is unique and needs to be treated as such, and then kept in balance in context with its own constitution. That's the whole force behind Ayurveda.
That is very different from what the typical model or what people are most familiar with. We go to so many highly specialized practitioners in Western medicine, and sometimes they forget that there's other parts of the body that are affected by what they're doing. I have learned that firsthand with my specialists over the years, and that's kind of where I got into doing what I do too, where it's like, no, there's much more to this, and we need to look at the entire body, the entire system to make yourselves feel better and to get that balance. So what are the things that you do, or how would a client of yours kind of go through your process? What are you looking for? And actually, once you start with, who do you see? Who comes to you for support?
Typically, there are two types, I guess you could say, of people who come. One is people who are interested in their health and well-being. They've already probably had some experience in the holistic world, and they're looking for the Ayurvedic approach. That's
Mm-hmm.
one. The second group is the people who have been to a bunch of doctors and have basically gotten the answer, we don't know, or we can't help you, or they're tired of taking prescription medicine,
Mm-hmm.
just to take another prescription medicine for their prescription medicine later on. And they're looking for a different answer. They're
Mm-hmm.
looking for something completely that they haven't experienced before.
So it's those
Those are
people
usually
that,
the types of people who walk through the door. Yeah.
right. Yeah. So I feel like that really resonates with people who listen to this podcast and who are interested in a more holistic approach, or just a different approach. They don't even really know what that is, where
Yeah.
they're just sick of, like you said, taking the medicines, which, I mean, there are definitely a place and time for medicine. But there's a time and place where you keep taking and doing all these different things with medications and procedures or surgeries or whatever it might be, and you're still not really feeling better. You're just sort of maybe stable, you could say. I know for myself, I would actually ask my doctor, okay, so when am I going to start feeling better? When is this medication going to work? And what I realized is that I was looking for the medication to solve my problems. And it didn't usually. It maybe just took the edge off of whatever it was. Just a little bit, like I said, that's where the stability came from. But it never really solved any problems. And I was so sick and tired of feeling like that, and just, you know, taking up space in this world. I was not really living or functional. And I feel like that's kind of the person you're describing potentially that may come to you. And that's definitely the people that I see. So I guess it's just really important for people to understand that there is something else out there. Check around, do your research. You don't have to just stay status quo, because that's what we're most familiar with.
Yeah, what I would say about Ayurveda in that is that Ayurveda is geared toward finding a root cause. So we have to deal with symptoms. That's just a reality. We don't want anyone suffering or in pain.
Sure.
But if you go to an Ayurvedic doctor like myself, what I will focus on, and what any Ayurvedic practitioner will focus on, is, okay, great, let's manage the symptoms, but what is really causing this problem,
Mm-hmm.
really? And it's never one thing, ever.
Mm.
So that's another mistake that we make in our Western mindset about healing, is that, oh, okay, if I get rid of gluten, I'll be fine. And then it's just gluten. Now
Yeah.
everything's gluten's fault, right?
Right.
Or if I get rid of this bad relationship, I'll be fine. And now everything's a relationship. Everything's a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never one thing,
Right.
ever. It's a confluence of factors that create our physiological reality. And if you notice, I slipped the relationship thing in there, because this whole idea that our mind and body are separate is
Mm-hmm.
not true. Ayurveda is very, very clear about it, and so are all the Eastern health systems like traditional Chinese medicine and such. Mind and body are one,
Mm-hmm.
and they're integrated into each other, and they're inseparable. So anything that happens in our minds happens in our bodies, and vice versa.
Right. I think that's becoming more, maybe not quite mainstream, but I feel like there's much more awareness to the mind body connection than there ever was. Thank goodness. I think we're kind of getting to that point where people are starting to make that connection, and people should probably start better healing or have better success with whatever process they're trying to go through to be healthy, if they're making that connection with the mind body, for sure. We talk about toxins, and most people think of chemicals when we're thinking about toxins, but toxic relationships, toxic job environment, toxic, those types of things absolutely impact, how we feel physically. It manifests in us physically. And I think that's becoming more and more understood by people. I don't know, would you agree with that? Or from people you're working with, do they start to make that connection a little bit better?
Yeah, they start to, and if they're not, that definitely focus on that when
Mm-hmm.
in conversation and in consultation. Um, that is crucial. I mean, the reality is that we're so hyper focused on chemicals or nutrient factors or all that stuff. Actually, those are less impactful on our body
Mm-hmm.
than our states, attitudes, moods, choices,
Right.
lifestyle choices, things like that. So a lot of those things are distractions from what would really heal us.
Mm-hmm.
Focusing on calories or focusing on vitamin C or focusing on collagen or whatever it is, the hottest new supplement out that's going to
Right.
heal everything. Yeah.
Right. And that, yeah, people again think it's going to be collagen or it's going to be vitamin D that's going to solve all the problems because I don't know if it's like a fight or flight sort of mechanism that keeps us looking outside of ourselves for the major impact of healing. And I think we need to, just like we just said, we need to look inward and look at what's going on in our bodies, what's going on in our environments in order to get true healing. Because if we're always looking outside of ourselves, we're not going to really get anywhere with that. And I have, again, some personal experience in that. But I think when it comes to the nutrition part of it, that's what people do. They're looking for the magic pill, the magic potion, the one stop shop to quick fix to help all of their symptoms. And so I happen to mention, I'll do my own segue here into this, but I mentioned the fight or flight process that I think most of our society is in. And you deal a lot with vagus nerve. And so I talk about that in my community too, with the parasympathetic and sympathetic. I don't, it's not my main focus, of course, but I'd love for you to explain that to us and how you utilize that or how you work with that with your people.
Yeah, I work a lot with that. The autonomic nervous system is part of our nervous system, and its name gives it away. It's
Mm-hmm.
autonomic. So most of its functions are completely automatic. So your heart rate, your breath rate, and bookmark that because we'll come back to breathing.
Mm-hmm.
But your breath rate and a lot of your digestive functions, so on and so forth, are completely. You don't have to think about them to perform their tasks. Thank
Right.
God.
Right.
Uh, Otherwise, we'd be very busy. So the autonomic nervous system is split into two branches. There's the parasympathetic nervous system, which originates at the base of the spine and at the tailbone. And so hence cranial sacral therapy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big influence there. And then there's the sympathetic nervous system, which originates from the center of the spine outward into your body. And they both are very different. And both of them are tied together by this gigantic nerve in your body called the vagus nerve, which is part of the parasympathetic nervous system. And the vagus nerve connects all your sense organs. It is I can speak right now the way I'm speaking because of largely in part my vagus nerve. It controls my heart rate.
Mm-hmm.
It determines how much digestive fluids I create and how I digest food. It connects to every vital organ in the body and more. So it's huge. And, it's crazy that we're educated on the heart, the brain, the lungs as just basic biology in, high school or whatever, elementary school. But this nerve is never mentioned.
No.
And it's been around for a long, long time. It's not like it's newly discovered or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit interesting that we don't learn about this basic system because it dictates so much of our behavior. So let's just take a real life example to kind of
Mm-hmm.
make it real. Let's say I'm sitting here talking to you, and all of a sudden someone comes bursting through the door and says, "Fire, fire, get out of the building." Right now, I'm in my parasympathetic nervous system, and that means my body's relatively relaxed. I can digest food. I can breathe normally. My heart rate's low, all that stuff. Someone bursts in the room and yells, "Fire, fire, fire." My ears pick that up. It runs through my vagus nerve. I interpret that as danger, threat.
Mm-hmm.
That runs through my vagus nerve. My vagus nerve says, "Go into your sympathetic nervous system fast, now." Shuts off my digestive system, increases my heart rate, increases my breath rate, makes me hyper vigilant. So all my senses become outward facing. So that's like what you were mentioning about how we only look outward.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm scanning the environment for where is that fire? Where are the threats? What is endangering my body? That's a very natural process. And so now, because my heart rate's increased and I start my liver is producing all this heat now and all that stuff, so I can move fast and act fast, assess a threat, and either fight the threat if possible. I can't fight a fire. So, but I can flee, I can flight from a
Mm-hmm.
fire,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe my nervous system will freeze, hoping that if I stay where I am, I won't be affected by the danger. So that's the autonomic nervous system that does that. So now I go into a whole different mode and I start reacting. I get up and run out of the room really fast. So thank God my heart rate's already elevated. It's prepared my body to take flight ahead of time. Because if I were super relaxed and just get up and move the building, that may be the right thing to do. But more often than not, when there's an acute threat, you do need to act fast and move fast
Right.
and get out, right? So that's a sympathetic nervous system. And that happens when there's a threat present. But the trick is it happens whenever I perceive a threat, whether there's a threat or not.
Mm-hmm.
So someone might open the door and it's like they're about to tell me that, I just won the lotto, whatever. But the way they open the door, my autonomic nervous system takes a jolt and I think I'm in danger.
Right.
And now my whole physiology changes. So if I was eating lunch, that means I stopped digesting my lunch.
Right.
I'm going to have indigestion. And then that's going to start a chain reaction. So that's a simple example that we can all understand. The important part about that is that our modern society, the way we typically run our lives, we spend way too much time in our sympathetic nervous system.
Right.
Our relationships have a huge effect on that, right? Are you going to leave me or are you going to stay with me? Right? We got kids now. Are you going to support the kids or are you going to leave me hanging with the kids? Are you going to hit me? Are you going to hurt me? Are you going to break my heart?
Mm-hmm.
All these things can be perceived as threats. And then that all affects our physiology majorly, much more than whether we eat granola bar or a fruit smoothie in the morning.
Right. Which is where people, I think, have heard the word, stress, or you're just stressed out. It's been watered down so much that we don't really understand how badly that impacts us when we're constantly in fight or flight mode, instead of, how we were kind of designed. It should be few and far between, where we're in that, running away from the saber-toothed tiger kind of, mindset. We shouldn't be in that constantly, and our modern day society keeps us in that, fight or flight, maybe freeze mode too often, way too often.
Yeah, and I think there's something important there, which is it's easy to say our modern society keeps us there, and it's true to
Right.
some extent, but
Mm-hmm.
we choose it a lot. We
Yeah.
choose it a lot because we are afraid of a threat, and we're not thinking at the time we're threatened, we're not thinking about the impact that's going to have on our body
Mm-hmm.
until after the fact. So someone comes up and is threatening in the sense like maybe it's at work, right? So it could be a look on their face, and it's like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired today. I just saw that look. That look, the last time I saw my boss have that look, someone got fired.
Mm-hmm.
Today it's my turn. I'm gonna get fired. That can send your whole body into a threat mode.
Right.
And we're at that moment, all you're thinking about is I'm gonna get fired. You're not thinking, oh, in 20 years this is gonna create Parkinson's.
Right.
That part of your mind is not operational because it's geared to deal with the immediate threat.
Yeah. Everything acute.
So we have to be aware of that as just people living in this body and engage in practices that maintain a healthy transition between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And one of those things is breathing. And that's why it's so heavily emphasized
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of healing practices, because breathing is controlled by the autonomic nervous system, but you also have conscious control over it. So you can create a bridge from your awareness, conscious awareness, to your autonomic nervous system and influence your autonomic nervous system directly via the breath. It's kind of a cool setup if you think about it.
Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about breath work, I mean, obviously, we just breathe without thinking of it based on what we know. But you mean something more specific and conscientious or more conscious that we're going through a process of breathing to help us calm. Is that what you are referring to?
Yeah, conscious
Mm-hmm.
breathing. In
Mm-hmm.
yoga, it's called pranayama. Yoga and
Mm-hmm.
Ayurveda, pranayama. There's a breathing practice in almost every healing tradition
Mm-hmm.
because it's so powerful.
Right.
And a lot of healing starts there. So here's the idea. If you're in your sympathetic nervous system, your body is not rejuvenating properly. It's not focused on that. It's focused on escape or protection.
Mm-hmm.
So it's utilizing your resources to basically escape or protect. That, as opposed to the parasympathetic nervous system, where your body is geared towards rejuvenation, rebuilding damaged tissues. And that doesn't just mean a cut. All day
Right.
long, we're damaging our tissues just by the living life and
Mm-hmm.
metabolizing and things like that. And then when we sleep, primarily when we sleep, the body works on restoring all the tissues to their proper form in accordance with your own constitution. That only happens properly in the parasympathetic nervous system, the relaxed one.
Right.
So if you're not engaging your parasympathetic nervous system enough, you're not going to heal. I don't care what kind of vitamins you eat. It's not going to happen. So breath work is a way of learning or training your autonomic nervous system to go from stress or sympathetic to rejuvenation or parasympathetic. And that's one way you could build that into your nervous system, is by breathing, having a consistent breathing practice, not just when you're freaked out.
Right.
And what that does is it creates what's called vagal tone,
Mm-hmm.
which equates to our word for resilience,
Sure.
stress resilience. So there's going to be stress. It's going to happen. And actually, a certain amount of stress is healthy for your body. It's only when it's too much that it becomes unhealthy for your body. And that's when resilience comes into play.
Okay.
So someone who's resilient, if let's say a month ago their boss had that look on their face and it's like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired, and they go into a whole downward spiral about that, and they're stressed out for hours, maybe days, maybe sometimes, and they're eating under that condition, and they're talking to their relationships under that condition, because guess what? If I'm threatened, what's very likely to happen to my partner? They're going to perceive my cues, and their autonomic nervous system is going to
Mm-hmm.
wake up. So it just feeds back, feeds back, feeds back. But if we can build resilience into our nervous system and learn how to transition from sympathetic to parasympathetic, we may still get that same fear,
Mm-hmm.
but the effects of that fear may only last for 15 minutes as opposed to 2 days.
Sure.
Well, that's huge. That makes
That's
a
a huge
huge,
difference.
that's a huge difference in your health profile for the future.
Sure.
Yeah.
So are there other ways to stimulate the vagus nerve? I've heard various things. There's different oils and, um, stuff besides the breath work, I guess I'm looking for. Do you have just to give a little snippet of what people can do?
Yeah, definitely what time you eat,
Mm-hmm.
honoring your circadian rhythm,
Mm-hmm.
what you eat, how you eat. There are all sorts of herbs, there are all sorts of oils. Um, how you engage socially is one of the major
Mm-hmm.
ones. So the fact, if you make eye contact, if you don't, smiling, laughing, all
Mm-hmm.
those things, feeling like you belong, having a safe place to reside, financial stability, all those things have a huge effect on our autonomic nervous system. And there are so many practices and solutions that can be had if someone's willing to jump into that world with a neutral minded helper. So
Mm-hmm.
typically not your mom or dad or brother or sister,
Right.
because there's so much closeness, or can be so much closeness there, or so much reactivity, that more often than not, I'm not saying every time, but more often than not, the triggers are shared.
Sure.
And so you need someone who's outside that world to help, at least for a time, never permanently, but at least for a time, to break apart the trigger points and the patterns and the habits and the worldviews that are so locked into, no, the world is a harsh, bad place to be. That's a very specific worldview that going to carry a lot of baggage behind it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole world to explore there.
That's not going to help with the parasympathetic much
No, it's not,
with that
right? And
mindset.
so that's going to become a partially a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, bad stuff happens, of course. But someone walking around in their sympathetic nervous system is more likely to create a negative situation than someone who is not. And I'm not saying that you can stand in front of a mirror and say, think positive. As a matter of fact, I'd say that will not work.
Mm-hmm.
You need to actually get into the nervous system and make changes in there.
Okay. That's really
So
interesting.
Ayurveda has a lot of therapies and approaches and
Mm-hmm.
things like that that encourage the body to enter into the parasympathetic nervous system.
Which can really, really support the root cause, healing of the root cause of whatever people are dealing with. It just, so basically you're saying starting with getting into that parasympathetic as much as possible and getting out of that sympathetic and really working to tone that vagal nerve.
Yeah, that's a great starting point for
Mm-hmm.
almost any healing path,
Mm-hmm.
because without it, you're not going to go very far.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing we talked about before we started recording was addiction, and addiction in kind of in any way that we can think of addiction, and how this vagus nerve support can also really help with that addictive process or help with supporting and overcoming that addictive process. Can you explain that a little bit more too?
Yeah, there is a great scientist. He's researching a lot of this stuff. His name is Stephen Porges. He wrote a book called The Polyvagal Theory,
Mm-hmm.
amongst other books, and he did a lot of research on this stuff. And a lot of the Eastern traditions have the same concept, like Ayurveda or Chinese medicine have the same concept. They just don't call it by the same words, so they don't
Sure.
use polyvagal or things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
so, anyways, he really broke open kind of a wall that was between those two healing systems and said, hey, polyvagal theory, check it out. And he talks a lot about addiction. And what he says is that basically addiction addiction's there for the most part because we feel isolated or abandoned. That's the root cause of addiction, is a
Mm-hmm.
separation and a mentality of separation, where I cannot find people to support me and make me and help me transition from sympathetic to parasympathetic, because we are wired as mammals to socially interact.
Right.
We're wired to do it. So don't think that it's not going to happen. We need it. It's actually a necessity to have healthy social interaction for our own health and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And so based on that, isolation becomes a life threat. And if you have a life threat, then you're going to enter your sympathetic nervous system. And there's a whole other side to this that deals with a different defense mechanism that's even more extreme, but not going to get into that one.
Mm-hmm.
But that one does matter for addiction too. So I guess I'll just touch on it.
Sure.
If we're in a life threat situation and we can't run, we can't fight, and we can't freeze, so basically we can't deal with the threat, then there's another part of our nervous system that activates actually via the parasympathetic nervous system. And that is an immobilization, which is a throwback to our reptilian days, where reptiles would completely shut down their metabolism
Mm-hmm.
to remain perfectly still so that they could outweight a predator. So a mammal predator would have to go off searching for food, while a reptile could sit there motionless for hours and hours and hours and hours.
Okay.
That's different from freeze. Freeze is an active stopping of the body.
Mm-hmm.
Immobilization is when your metabolism actually starts to shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a defense mechanism that humans don't do so well with because we're mammals. If we start to shut down our metabolism, it's very hard for us to come back. But if we get threatened enough, we will. And it actually increases our pain thresholds. So in life threat, that's good because it protects us from experiencing a lot of pain and so on and so forth. So that is what Stephen Porges or the polyvagal theory would call trauma. That's trauma, is when you go into that immobilization state. Not trauma as in, oh my God, you really stressed me out, I'm traumatized. Different definition of trauma. Trauma is a whole physiological function of that. That's where he thinks a lot of addictions come into play. And I agree with him. And from an
Mm-hmm.
Ayurvedic standpoint, that's how I would assess it, is that addiction comes into play there because someone they can't feel safe anymore. The feeling of safe feels threatening. So they'll never really let themselves ever really relax or let go, or their autonomic nervous system won't ever really return to a normal state of safety. So in an attempt to get a feeling of safety, they'll turn to a substance. Alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, heroin, so on and so forth.
Right.
You name it. Food, let's not forget that one.
Yeah.
And so the whole point of that is that we use substances to try and regulate ourselves. We say, oh, I feel like crap, but if I eat this donut, I'll feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not thinking about the long-term consequence.
Right.
And, the next morning we might wake up and swear that we're never going to eat another donut again. But when we're feeling crappy and we want to self-regulate, we go and we eat the donut. Because if we don't, it requires more resources from us to hold a position of not. And then that creates more stress. And then that drives us further into the sympathetic nervous system. And we want it even more because that's
Mm-hmm.
our regulation device.
Sure.
So when we approach healing, when I sit down with a client and we start talking about their food, I'm very aware that this is going to stress them out, changing their diet.
Mm-hmm.
And there are very specific approaches we have to take when we do that. They have to become aware that it's going to stress them out. They have to not underestimate the power of that. They have to aware that they're probably going to revisit their original threats. So I stopped drinking alcohol and all of a sudden I become this angry person.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you so angry? Anger is a way of protecting yourself from someone maybe trying to attack you or abuse you. So you get angry to try and fight them. Well, the ghost of that is still living inside their autonomic nervous system. So it's like, why am I getting so angry? There's nothing out in the world that's angering me. It's like, yeah, there is something inside your world that's angering you.
Mm-hmm.
And that needs to be explored. You can't just ignore that.
Right.
That anger needs to be expressed and resolved, even if it's just a ghost of the past, so that the nervous system can change and recreate the world, recreate the relationship with the outside world. That is a change in the autonomic nervous system, and that is going to provide that ultimate relief from addictive tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even like the word addiction, to tell you the truth, because
Yeah.
we all want to bond. And if we can't bond, we turn to a substitute. And that substitute's a substance. It's a food, it's a person, it's an emotion, it's whatever. We just bond with something. And we choose it at some point in our
Mm-hmm.
lives. And usually when we're very young, we choose it. And we don't know. I lived in, I'm not saying me myself, but there are plenty of people hear the story. I live in an abusive household. And the only thing that ever made me feel better was, there you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
And the sad thing is, as we mentioned again before recording, was about the societal view of addiction, or whatever word we want to use to replace that, and how I feel like some addiction is viewed as better than others, if that makes sense. People really judge addiction because they don't understand it. But if we really think about our individual, behaviors and what we do, we're all addicted to something to some degree.
Yeah. Johann Harish has a great TED Talk. He wrote the book Lost Connections. He
Mm-hmm.
did a lot of research on addiction. He studied Portugal, which had a very different approach to dealing with their highly addicted population. What we do basically is shun addicts if they
Mm-hmm.
get to a point that's not a socially acceptable addiction. So here's what I see in the clinic all the time. Someone comes in, how many cups of coffee do you drink? 6 a day. I would call that, I'd say, okay, there's an addiction to coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Or they bonded with coffee because they're avoiding something else.
Mm-hmm.
Or they bonded with coffee because it gives them a feeling that allows them to function. And
Right.
if they don't function, then now cue their fear. And whether that fear is real or not doesn't matter. It's their fear. It's happening
Right.
inside their nervous system. So it's real to their body. So that's a societally acceptable addiction, though.
Yes.
Coffee, right?
Yes,
But
for
someone who's
sure.
taking heroin, oh no, now they're evil.
Mm-hmm.
They're dangerous. They're going to deal damage to us. They're going to harm my children. And so we push them away. But
Mm-hmm.
that then exacerbates their original wound of isolation. Then they probably maybe get thrown in jail, where a whole bunch of horrible things could happen to them,
Mm-hmm.
on and on and on and on and on and on and on.
Right.
So Johan Harish speaks a lot about this as no, there needs to be a societally different approach that is much more, that helps people struggling with severely addictive tendencies to reincorporate in a safe and healthy way into healthy relationships. Now, the problem with that is if we all walk around thinking, oh, I'm so healthy and you're so not healthy, there is no healthy relationship available to them because I'm judging them.
Mm-hmm.
So if they step into a relationship with me, it can't be healthy because of my problems, not necessarily theirs. But if I walk around saying, no, there's nothing wrong with me, everything's wrong with you,
Yeah.
we're not making ourselves available for their healing process, and we're sitting there in denial about our own addictions.
Right.
Well, that's pretty hypocritical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Stop pointing the finger outward. Yeah.
right. It's
Yeah.
interesting how we can twist things to fit our own narrative or our own experiences, and we might be actually the ones that have the issue or
Yeah.
the addiction or whatever you want to call it. So it's crazy.
And I think it's important to say it's not, addiction is the negative side of the desire to bond. It's bonding gone wrong. Let's put it
Mm-hmm.
that way.
Mm-hmm.
Addiction is bonding gone wrong. So to
I like
heal
that.
addiction, we have to create real sources of bonding with other people and, frankly, other mammals
Mm-hmm.
specifically, other creatures that will engage in social interaction. And that brings into, what we eat, because are we eating a bunch of animals? That kind of thing. And what effect does that have on us and on our psyche that we don't know about? Well, the
Mm-hmm.
answer is a lot. I mean, a lot, not just our body, but our psyche. And we could go on and on and on about that. I don't know how far down that rabbit hole you want to go, but that
Right.
all matters when you're struggling with addiction. All of that,
Right. Yeah.
all of it.
So some, the takeaways would be is to really start working on breath work and toning that vagus nerve and getting some education on that. And you provide something, a freebie for this audience. I'll have this in the show notes, but if you email Victor with the code ROCK, you can schedule a free 15-minute vagus nerve assessment. So what could they glean from that to help this
Well,
process get going on helping their sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous
yeah,
system?
if you or your loved one is awakening to the fact that bonding has gone wrong, then it's a great 15 minutes, because relatively quickly with focused time, we can start to understand, okay, where are some of the core wounds and where are some of the starting places, right? You're not going to heal in 15 minutes.
Right.
But where's some of the starting places, and where's a really good place to begin opening up to a different way of doing relationship with your body, with your own nervous system and the nervous systems around you. So if when I talk to you, for example, right now, I'm talking to your consciousness, your awareness that's present between us.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have to be very aware that I'm talking to your autonomic nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't know much about. I don't know you very personally or well, but there
Mm-hmm.
is a world of personal experiences inside your autonomic nervous system.
Right.
And what I'm saying is impacting them, and vice
Mm-hmm.
versa, vice
Mm-hmm.
versa. And
Right.
not only am I talking to both parts of you, my autonomic nervous system's talking to both parts of you. So in any single relationship with two people, there are actually 4 relationships going on at any given moment. That's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why relationships are so sophisticated and so complex. And
Right.
it's like, all I did was walk in the door and say hi. Now, like everything's falling apart. What the
Yeah.
heck? Right. So we start
Yeah.
talking about then we start talking about how to take care of your body a lot better so that you can unravel some of this more deeper, difficult, dug in stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I'll make sure that that's in the show notes and people can reach out to you. Also, your website is the International Institute of Ayurveda. So I'll put that link in there as well. Is there anything else you'd like to touch on before we sign off?
Yeah, you can it's the short URL is www.ayurveda, that's AYURVE, D as in dog, .com. And
Mm-hmm.
you can email me at victor at that URL.
Perfect.
And that's a quick way to get to me. Questions, I love connecting. That's the whole point of all this is let's connect.
For sure.
So, yeah, thank you, Tiffany. I really appreciate you hosting me, and thank you for asking wonderful questions.
Yeah, it was great listening to this. I've always been interested in Ayurveda, and just having an actual practitioner on has really been informative and exciting for me, because I think, what I do and what you do are very, very similar, just from very different aspects, and what we're trying to get to, the same results. So it just kind of goes to show that for true healing, you might need to look at various modalities, and there's just not one quick fix for anything. So
Yeah, no
I,
quick fixes in the healing world.
no. So I really appreciate you highlighting that and being here and sharing with us your wonderful information. And like I said, everything will be in the show notes so people can access you. And, thank you so much for being on and spending time with us.
Thank you. See you again soon.
Bye. I'm trying to stop record.